I'm Anthony Wright, and I'm your host today, along with my co-host.
Adam Dietz.
And this is The Living Conversation. And we are here with our guest, Nick. And uh, forgive me, Nick, what is your last name?
Egan. I was just going to put it on the on my profile here.
Okay, great.
Nikki. Yeah.
All right. So, and Adam and I were talking about that Adam is going to begin a podcast that is a little bit more flexible than the radio format that we're in right now. So why don't you talk a little bit about that to get us started, Adam?
Yeah, thank you. So also welcome everyone to the first episode of the Way Between podcast, the crossover episode. And basically, I just honestly enjoy speaking with you guys a lot and felt like I had the bandwidth to do a little more on it. And I know you guys both are swamped, so I figured I would take the lead on the Way Between podcast where we can do, I can host it. It's a little bit more of a long form where we can get more in depth, I think, on certain things and do a little more storytelling. A lot of times here we in a fun way bounce around from ideas to ideas. We have to take those quick breaks and whatnot. So on the podcast format, we'll have a little more time and we'll, hopefully have Anthony and Nick on quite often and explore philosophy in a story format where we're looking at different philosophers and philosophies, how they developed over the years, how they began, what are some key points that we can use even now in our life today. So a lot of things that we look at here on the Living Conversation, but just in a little bit more of an in-depth format, I would say.
And
That's exciting. Congratulations.
that's going to be available on the Apple Podcasts.
Yes, that will be available on Spotify and Apple and everywhere else that you might want
Okay.
to get your podcast from, definitely.
All right. Well, what's up, you guys? Anybody want to start?
I'll let
Yeah.
Adam. Adam, Yeah. you can start. Yeah, you tell me. Yeah, I mean, the different kind of things that we'll be looking at, as you guys well know, I have a manuscript out, working on trying to get different eyeballs on. Originally, I had it titled a short, well, now I changed it. It's called The Art of Living, but
Okay.
it was meant to be in the first place a story of philosophy, East and West.
Uh-huh.
And it was meant to describe different philosophers and how they influenced their societies, how they developed their ideas, and how their influence still trickles down all the way to us today. How their influence helped shape institutions, East and West. How their influence helped shape hearts and minds, East and West. So that's going to be a big focus on the Way Between podcast. For example, looking at the origins of Socrates or Confucius or Lao Tzu or Huineng from the Zen tradition, making sure we give a real thorough description of how their ideas arose, maybe a little bit about their biography, and that'll be the jumping off point to some conversations about how their philosophy can influence us today, how their philosophy can help us in the art of living, in the art of living well, help us navigate life. Basically, we talked about before on this podcast about how Socrates, one of the first things that hit for me in philosophy was in my philosophy 101 class as a freshman, where Socrates is trying to show the power and the value of philosophy. And his argument is that, if you're going out to sea, wouldn't you want a wise, experienced sea captain, or would you want an ignorant one? Which one will give you better luck? If
Mhm.
you're same thing with a doctor, same thing with a general. So he says the argument is, then why in the world would you not value philosophy as the highest good? Why in the world would you not seek the art of wisdom so you know how to navigate this life with the best luck? So that's one example of where we're looking at, the most famous philosophers, most influential philosophers, and how they can guide us in a lot of ways. So when I first heard that story, I mentioned before, that was it for me. I went straight to registration and changed my major. I said, I agree with you, Socrates. I want to learn how to live well.
Yeah.
Yeah, it reminds me in Buddhism, specifically in Tibetan Buddhism, there are a lot of formulations, a lot of almost like
Well, they're just lenses with which to view the entirety of spirituality. And one of the most famous and one of the most foundational is view, path, and then results. So it's like the view is
Hmm.
philosophy in one way. It's also like my meditative view. It's how I'm thinking about myself and others. And it informs then path, right? So the view is the foundational component of path, and then that will lead to ideally like the outcome of enlightenment, which would be the result. So that view piece is so important, and it just reminds me as you were talking, Adam. It wasn't until early, I won't say modern times, but kind of pre-modern times that philosophy was divorced from the path element, and especially in the West. In the East, not as much, right?
Oh, right.
Philosophy was always a component of the path.
Yep.
It still is, and so it was like a modernization of philosophy as its own discipline that then also lost elements of the path component, from at least my perspective.
Definitely,
Yep.
definitely. And Anthony, you may remember this as well, where Dr. Wu had a similar type of outlook on this. We always mention Dr. Yi Wu from our studies at California Institute of Integral Studies on this show. We often mention him as a mentor for all three of us, really, in so many
Yep.
ways.
Mhm.
But he had a developed a system of integral life philosophy. So
Yes.
the Institute of Asian Studies, where we studied, was renamed the California Institute of Integral Studies. The Institute of Asian Studies was co-founded by Alan Watts and Haridas Chaudhuri
Yep.
from India. And a little backstory. And Haridas Chaudhuri was a student of Sri Aurobindo. So Sri Aurobindo developed, I think it was integral yoga,
Yes.
and that was where you were using yoga to bring, I would say, maybe bring spirituality into this world.
Mhm.
And his student Haridas Chaudhuri developed integral philosophy. And as Dr. Wu began working in the early 80s, I think it was, at the Institute of Integral Studies, he developed a theory of integral life philosophy. So integral life philosophy is that all philosophy should influence daily life. And as he developed this system more and more, the reason why I mention this is because he developed a triangle of integral life philosophy.
Yes.
So when Nick's mentioning view, path, and results, it reminds me of Dr. Wu's triangle. The top point of the triangle had reality. Reality, like, okay, Tao in
Yep.
in Daoism, or heaven in Confucianism, or maybe you could subtitle it humanity in Confucianism. Then the base of the triangle had your practice and your theory, your words. So this was his triangle of integral life philosophy. Nick, could you say something about maybe how you would look at that in terms of view and path and results?
Well, that would be so result in that formulation would be considered Tao or humanity if you wanted to take a Confucian bent to it. It's like so it's
Oh,
interesting because there's sort of a circular notion to it because
sure.
ultimately certainly within Buddhism the view creates the path, which then creates the result. But from another perspective, the result is already self-existent, right? So
Oh,
like
yeah.
we don't need to fabricate nature of mind or Buddha nature or however you're thinking, or emptiness or interconnectedness. Those are all terms for kind of the same thing in Buddhism, just come described from different perspectives. And so the result is already pre-existing. But from the point of view of the practitioner, you have to walk the path, right? Even though, from an outsider's perspective, an enlightened perspective, that result is already existing. So I think it goes very nicely when you're talking about reality. That aligns with what the result would be because it's not something that's created or fabricated. It's something that's discovered as an already existing.
Discovered. Yeah, I was
We'll
thinking about
call
that.
it
You have to come to the realization.
But
yeah, yeah, exactly.
with students and clients, it's assisting them to develop the view, be able to see. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's interesting. Like I would say all mistaken action comes from a lack of view, right? So like if you are finding yourself on a path or if you want to say if you're talking like more of a coaching perspective, it's like the patterns of behavior and belief that I have are creating outcomes that I don't
Right.
necessarily want.
Yep.
And then it's like, well, what other beliefs and actions should I have? Because most people are so locked into their current pattern of beliefs and behavior that they don't see that there are alternatives, right? We call it like reality, right? Well, that's just reality. I'm just responding. I mean, we've all had
Uh,
we've
And
all
they
had
don't
instances.
know that they have
Yeah,
a choice.
you're right, exactly. So the first step would be just recognizing that actually that's a pattern of belief and behavior that I could potentially let go of or change or disrupt in some way.
Uh-huh.
And then that's so if we take like
Transformation.
that base path fruition, that would be the foundation of it, right?
How do you assist people in, I mean, it's kind of like I've heard Alan Watts talk about does a fish notice the water that it's in?
Hmm.
Or do the birds notice the air? Or for us, do we notice mind? How do
Hmm.
you assist people to that larger context?
That's where the dialectics come in, right? So like very much a kind of a Socratic method. So asking questions about it. So it's like, well, if there's some, so I always start with there's usually some situation or a result that they are not liking, right? There's some outcome in their normal life. And so then the question is like,
Oh,
okay, well, you don't like X outcome. Then what are you telling yourself? What's how I like to talk in terms of story and narrative. So I say,
okay.
what's the story that you're telling yourself about that? Well, I had to do that. Okay, well, why did you have to do that? Well, I had to do that because this person in the situation was the other way. Okay, cool. Yeah, you had to do that in these ways. What might somebody else have done in that situation? And then if they say everybody would have done the exact same thing in that exact same situation, there's no other outcome, then I can kind of unravel that a little differently. Most of the time, 99% of the time, they'll say, well, other people might have done this, they might have done that. And then usually what happens is people are very quick to say, oh, but there's reasons why I didn't do that thing. And it's like, okay, yeah, let's just
Oh,
bracket that. So I use a lot of like phenomenological tools from psychology. So let's bracket
sure. Yep.
that. We'll come back to it. I'm not saying that's wrong. But if we were that person, like how might somebody else, and sometimes like a really good way to shake it up is to use people that they don't necessarily admire, like not not idealized, and do the opposite. So like like if you are very liberal, you then use Donald Trump. Like what would Donald Trump have done?
Right,
Right?
right,
Or if
right,
you're very conservative, use like what would Biden do? And
right.
people are like they laugh exactly like that, and they're like, well, they would have done the worst thing possible thing. It's like okay, so there's a range of choices about how one might respond to situations, and that those choices will then create different outcomes. So it kind of loosens. It's all about just like loosening up the grip of so-called reality.
Because one of the things that I find very useful and very powerful is to assist people with a hypothetical
Yeah.
about, well, what would it be like if? Yeah, but
Hmm.
I can't. Well, but in order to process that, you just did. So, what would it be like if we had to take a short break? I'm Anthony
Nice.
Wright, and I am your co-host with
Adam Dietz.
on the Living Conversation, and we are interviewing Nick. And how can people get a hold of you, Nick?
They can go to nickeganphd.com or they can go to shiftleadership.group.
And
So
it's
any of those things will work.
EGAN.
EGAN, correct.
Okay, and Adam.
Yeah, you can search me up on Substack, free Substack, The Way Between. And you can also contact me directly, deetsadam@gmail.com.
Great. Well, we're going to take a short break and be right back. So stay tuned.